Okay, so we'll start with a little background on who Zyxel is. So Zyxel um, has been making computer networking equipment since all the way back in 1989. Um, so we've been doing this for over 30 years at this point. And I've been here for coming close to 20 years now, not quite there yet. But we serve 150 different global markets. I think regionally, Europe is our biggest market for us, but obviously we've been here in the United States since I want to say possibly as far back as the original 1989, but if not, since the mid 90s at the best. We've got 100 million devices deployed out in the field. Now, our company is a Taiwanese company, so our headquarters our global headquarters is based out of Hsinchu, Taiwan. The US office, which handles most of North America, we handle US and Canada. Um, we are based out of Anaheim, California. So that's where our warehouse is. That's where our accounting is. That's where our sales team is. And that's where our support team is. So when you call in to get support, you are talking to a Zyxel employee. And for most hours of the day, you're talking to somebody here in California. Otherwise, you'll be talking to one of our associates out of the German office. So for those of you on the East Coast that call in kind of early, you will get transferred to our German office if the US office hasn't opened up yet. You are here because you joined our partner program. Hopefully, if not, you might want to look into it. The partner program gets you access to a dedicated salesperson who can help you out with pre-sales things, guidance, gets you access to our sales engineer, deal registration, discounts automatically applied for you when you make purchases through our distribution partners, etc. We have three primary salespeople for North America here. On the West Coast, we have Andy. In the central regions here, the purple, we have Jacob. And for Canada and the East Coast, we have David. So you'll be talking to one of those three guys based on wherever your company is. If your company is across multiple states, it's usually assigned based on where your corporate headquarters is located. There may be some exceptions to that, though. So we make a number of different types of products here, and we'll be touching, for the most part, on most of these. Security appliances, wireless products, access points, switches. We do have some consumer-focused products. We got to hold on a second, guys. I apologize. Let me pause for just a second. Okay, sorry about that. I had one of the sales guys reporting a problem with the webinar. So I needed to fix that. So we do have some consumer products, consumer routers, power line equipment. We're not going to really talk about those today. They're a really tiny portion of our stuff. And then network management, we've got a couple of different solutions there that we'll talk about as we go through today. And in fact, we're going to start with network management with Nebula. There we go. So Nebula is the first full stack cloud-based management system that's designed for more of the SMB space. The original pioneer in this space that most of you are probably aware of is Meraki. We launched, I think, back in 2016 with our SMB solution, and we've been improving it ever since. So we'll talk a little bit about this. This does touch our three main product categories. It touches our firewalls, it touches our switches, it touches our access points. And basically what it does is it gives you the option to manage our equipment through the cloud. It's not a mandatory thing. It's something you can do yourself, but it's been designed to make installation and configuration go a lot smoother and quicker. The agent itself that does this is built into the hardware, so there's no extra hardware or software you need to set up. Basically, the device, if you've chosen to manage it in Nebula, when you plug it in for the first time, it'll reach out to the cloud, it'll update its firmware, and it'll automatically download its configuration. All of your customers, all of their sites can be managed just by going to nebula.zyxel.com. And you don't have to really do anything, including taking the product out of the box to get started. All of the boxes for our switches and access points have a QR code on the outside. You simply scan that with our Nebula mobile app, and it allows you to assign the device to a customer and to a specific site that they have. So you can start doing the configuration. So basically, the boxes can be shipped to you from distribution. You scan them, assign them to your customer, and then you forward them on to the customer's location for the actual hardware install. There is no configuration that needs to be done locally in 90% of the cases. You simply do everything through the cloud. No cloud keys are required, no virtual machines, no special software. Everything is done through a web page or through the mobile app. Okay, so Nebula Control Center is the primary or the primary way you're going to interface with your hardware if you choose to use Nebula. You simply access it through a web browser. So anywhere you've got a device with a web browser and an internet connection, you can see your customers and manage their networks. All updates for you are going to be done over the cloud. So all configuration or over the air. So all configuration changes are done in the cloud and then pushed out to the individual devices. And that includes firmware updates. And we do include the ability to schedule those firmware updates based on the time that's most convenient for you or your customer. And Nebula has been designed from the ground up with the idea that you're going to have multiple customers and they may have multiple sites. Everything's been done to make that easy to quickly switch between different customers and different sites. So this is what you're going to see when you first pull up on your customer sites. This is the dashboard here. So you've got various different widgets on here, and these are all going to be stuff that you can customize which widgets you see. So you're seeing the information that you're most interested in seeing. So you can see in this example here across the top here, we've got APs showing how many of your APs are online, how many wireless users are currently connected to that network, switch status, how much of your PoE power budget is currently being used, your WAN throughput utilization, and then we've got some breakdowns here of which clients are using most of your bandwidth, which applications are using most of your bandwidth, things like that. Up across the top here, we've got two pull down menus. One is your customers, and then the other is populated with their sites. You can quickly jump between sites or jump between customers just by using those pull down menus. And then if you need more in-depth management or configuration, it's all right here on the left-hand side of the screen. So Nebula, and this is key here, Nebula is a free solution that we offer to you. So it's not free for a limited time, it is free. There is no limit to the number of customers you can manage with Nebula. There is no limit to the number of devices you can manage with Nebula. So when you're looking at products, if you're looking for a product that supports Nebula, the term you're looking for is Nebula Flex. When we originally launched Nebula, we sort of copied the Meraki Cisco way of doing things where you had one line of hardware that was just for cloud, one line of hardware that was not for cloud. And we have gotten away from that. So at this point, almost everything we offer now fits under Nebula Flex. So it gives you the option to be able to manage each device either a traditional way, directly via command line or SNMP or GUI, or by managing it using the Nebula Cloud. So you can always switch back and forth between those two different modes. And then we also have something called Nebula Flex Pro. So with Nebula, we do have some extra features and functionality that can be unlocked with additional licenses. So if you see a device that's labeled Nebula Flex Pro, it just means that it comes bundled with 1 year of our Nebula Pro service license to go along with it. And in the case of our access points, Nebula Flex Pro products can also be managed by our security appliances. So if you're looking for local controller management, Nebula Flex Pro access points are what you're going to be looking for. So that's it as far as a high level overview of Nebula. I do a little bit more in-depth Nebula webinar every month. I think we've still got that coming up later this month. So if you want to learn a little bit more about Nebula, we've got that. Marcus occasionally does some more in-depth deep dives on configuring Nebula and setting things up. So now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about our security products. This is probably a product line here that causes the most confusion for us because we've got a couple different families of devices and there's some confusion always about, what does what. So we'll start off with here, ICSA Labs has been testing and certifying firewall security appliances for quite a long time now. I believe they are currently owned by Verizon, but we've been certified by them now for 20 years straight, our security appliances. So for those of you, when you're dealing with a customer and you're saying, hey, we want to use a Zyxel security appliance, and they say, well, who's Zyxel? We've never heard of them. This is something you can point to. Here's an independent third-party labs that tests and certifies our product to maybe make them a little bit more comfortable if they haven't heard about us before. Now, something we do that's very different than most of our competition in this space is rather than try to provide UTM services entirely in-house, we instead have partnered with different vendors to provide those security services for us. So we're using some of the best in class partners to provide those services rather than trying to do it all in-house. So those include, McAfee, Lastline, Bitdefender, Trend Micro, et cetera. So we'll go through some of the common features you're going to find across most of our security appliances. Most of them can do link aggregation groups where you can combine multiple ports together, either for higher link availability or for higher aggregated bandwidth. We do have device high availability. So if your security appliance goes down, a second one can automatically take over. We do SSL packet inspection, so we can apply those IDP UTM services even to traffic that is encrypted using SSL. We have Radius and Active Directory integration. On the VPN side of things, we can do VPN high availability. We can do WAN load balancing. We can do multiple WANs with failover, et cetera. We have what we call a virtual tunnel interface that allows you to virtually link and combine VPN tunnels together. We have an SSL VPN extender, so it's an easy way to be able to allow people to use SSL VPN for remote access back to the office when they're out remote. For mobile devices, we support L2TP over IPsec. And on the UTM side of things, we've got various different functionalities there. We've got antivirus functionality, content filtering, Layer 7 application intelligence. So what this does is this allows you to create your policy rules and other rules, bandwidth management, things like that, using the individual application and oftentimes with individual features of those applications. So rather than needing to know ports and IP ranges and what type of protocols they're using, we've simply got a pull down menu with a list of different applications. So you can just choose the application to create your rules. Geo Enforcer. Many of our devices have the ability to do sandbox and machine learning on VPNs, botnet malware blocker, intrusion protection, et cetera. And most of our devices have an integrated wireless LAN controller. So you can use most of our security gateways. If you want to have local wireless LAN management, you can do that using those. That works with our Nebula Flex Pro access points. We also have some additional hotspot functionality. So you can use this gateway as a captive portal and provide some basic accounting, user management, and things like that for smaller hotels, coffee shops, things like that. So our gateways here are certified to work with AWS and Microsoft's cloud services. So basically what this does is this creates a VPN tunnel from your security appliance to your AWS instance or your Microsoft cloud instance, so that it is managing that connection to the cloud. So you can host your applications in the cloud and have them be accessible to your LAN users as if they were hosted locally there on the network. So we've got three main product lines here when it comes to our security appliances. So we've broken them up and we sort of named them here to try to keep it easy for you. There's a Simplicity series, the Flexibility series, and the Ultimate series. So the Simplicity series is our VPN series. So those are going to be those of our security appliances whose model name starts with VPN. And as the name implies, that's really the focus, to be able to provide a secure firewall with VPN functionality there. And it does give you the ability through optional licenses to be able to enable content filtering, hotspot management, but it does not include any of the other UTM type services. So if you're looking for UTM type services, you want to probably look at our USG Flex as a starting point. This is our traditional UTM security appliance. So similar to the VPN series, it does provide VPN functionality. It comes with content filtering, but it also has additional features here like the Geo Enforcer, that layer 7 application control, malware blocker, IDP, email security, deep scan mode, etc. So this is probably our best selling series that we have out there. These are sold in 2 different flavors, one with the UTM services bundled out of the box. So you open it up, plug it in, and you've got a year. And those that have the ability to use those UTM licenses, but don't include any licenses out of the box. And then our ultimate series is the ATP series, which is our next generation firewall appliances. And those ones come out of the box with a year's worth of UTM features, including the ability to do sandboxing, IP reputation, and DNS reputation filtering. So we also have the ability to do SD-WAN. It's not something we sell a lot of, but I do want to talk about it really briefly here. So SD-WAN is software-defined WAN. And basically, it's taking advantage of the fact that in some scenarios here, you have control over the WAN port at multiple locations. And because you have access to that WAN port, you can sort of, we can improve on how TCP, IP, and VLAN and stuff work to improve and get better performance over those VPN connections. So if you need a VPN connection that's got really low latency, so really low latency, high throughputs, very reliable. SD-WAN is a way to achieve that. Traditionally, this type of functionality has been provided through MPLS connections, which are really expensive, dedicated connections between locations that you buy from somebody like an AT&T or Verizon. So we'll just give an example of, the difference SD-WAN makes. We'll skip through another slide here. So this is just showing here, we've got a VPN connection between our office here in, I believe, Germany and our office in Taiwan. It's a 290 millisecond ping time between the 2 locations. There's 0.3% packet loss and 3 milliseconds of jitter. We transferred a Linux ISO. It's a 1.9 gig file. Over a standard VPN connection, it took over 2 hours to do that, where with SD-WAN enabled and that optimization we can do, since we control the endpoints on both sides, we were able to transfer that file in just 10 minutes. So I also want to take a couple slides here to talk about the sandboxing features. So the way traditional UTM works, and that includes our USG Flex series of products. You've basically got a service that provides signature files that help your security appliance identify spam, IDP, antivirus, whatever it happens to be, right? So you've got these signatures for different types of traffic and says, hey, these ones are good, these other ones are bad. The problem we run into is that there's always new threats, new types of traffic, new network behaviors that are always popping up as the internet evolves and new software comes online. So there's always going to be some sort of delay between when some sort of new type of traffic or application comes along and when the signature providers are able to see those behaviors, classify the behaviors, create a signature for them, and then push that signature out to the security appliances. So we'll call those zero-day exploits. So zero-day exploits are something where, this new type of traffic. there's going to be a gap. There's going to be several days or maybe weeks between when something new comes along and when signatures are going to become available for those types of new types of traffic. So sandboxing is the way to sort of get past that. So that's something that's offered in the ATPs and is being added as an optional feature via license on the USG Flex series. And basically what it does is it takes advantage of the cloud and the fact that there's thousands and thousands of Zyxel security appliances out being deployed, plugged into the network. So basically when something new comes along, your security appliance is going to be able to see that new type of thing and go, hey, wait a minute, I don't recognize this. So it's going to be able to what we call sandbox. It's going to be able to capture it, see what's going on, and relay that to a cloud instance. And that cloud instance is basically able to determine what it is. Is this something bad or is this something good? And then be able to update your security appliance to let it know. And it's taking advantage of a cloud service. So even if your product hasn't yet seen this, another Zyxel product, as soon as it's seen it, as soon as it's been uploaded to the cloud and it's been identified, is able to then push that information out to all Zyxel ATP users. So that's something that's being powered by Last Line. Then on the reporting and management side of things, we do have something here called SecuReporter, which is a dedicated cloud service just for our security appliances. And the main idea behind it is to give you visual representation of what's going on the security appliances for the networks that you manage. So this is something that can be used in conjunction with Nebula or can be used completely independently of Nebula. And basically what it's doing here is it's taking stuff from your log data, application data, security data, uploading it into the cloud. We perform analytics on it and generate a number of reports and visualizations of what's been going on. So it's going to let you know, who, what, where, or who, what, and when different things have happened on your network, whether it's, what type of threat was blocked, what type of websites your users were going to that maybe they shouldn't have thanks to content filtering, things like that, and visualize that for you. So if you're selling security appliances and security services to your customers, this is a great way to be able to generate reports that you can give them to show them, look, these UTM services you're paying for, here's how they've protected you, here's how they've kept you safe. So when a year expires or whatever it happens to be, and it's time to renew those services, they can see, hey, there is a value to having those services on my security appliance. And just like Nebula, you go to one web page, you log in, and you see all of your clients and their information through that. There's no having to set up, and configurations on each individual appliance to point it to, a log server somewhere and configure the log server, etc. So you can set up and generate custom reports, and you can set those out to go to yourself or go out to your customers. You can add your branding to them just to keep them informed of what's going on. So that's it for security. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move to switching. Errol, I saw your question. I don't know the answer off the top of my page, so we're going to have to come back to that at the end, and I'll see if I know the answer to that question. Errol's also got the question of, does the USG or UTM support zero trust? I don't know the answer to that. Unfortunately, that's a question probably for Tri. So Tri is our security product manager. He handles the security products day to day. I do not. I'm more focused on our wireless products. So I don't have some of the answers to those nitty gritty questions on which product has which specific features and whatnot. So I'm sorry I can't answer that for you. I would send that question to your salesperson, Jacob, Andy, David. They can get that answer for you. Okay, so on to switches. So switches generally are a pretty easy type of product, right? You plug them in, they've got PoE or they don't, they've got a certain speed and you're good to go, generally. So unfortunately though, if you look at our price list or our product catalog, you'll go, well, why do you have so many 24-port PoE switches? So, I need one. How do I figure out which one of these that I need? So I'm going to start by talking about our naming, because that'll help you figure out the sort of functionality that each switch offers. So when you're looking at those model numbers on the catalog or at the price sheet or a distribution, it'll help you figure out if that's maybe the right product for you to be looking at. So to begin with, if you start with the letters ES, that tells you it's a fast Ethernet switch. The ports only support 100 megabits per second. If the model name starts with GS, that's telling you that all of the ports on that switch are 1 gig ports. If you see XS, that is telling you all of the ports on that switch are multi-gig ports, usually 10 gig, but not always. But every port is going to be a multi-gig port. If the switch starts with XGS, that's telling you most of the ports are gigabit ports, but there are multi-gig uplink ports on that switch. So, if you've got a situation where you only need 1 gig per office or 1 gig per room, but you do need multi-gig to be able to provide backhaul to those, the XGS series are what you're looking for. And then we do have an MGS series, which you may stumble across on the web. We don't really offer those in North America. That's something that's more of a global product that we don't offer here. But if you do see an MGS, that's a switch that's designed for the larger telcos primarily, or some really large networks. And then if you look at the last couple letters at the end of the switch model name, that'll tell you whether it has PoE or not. So P standard for standard PoE, HP standard for PoE plus. There is now PoE plus plus, and at least at this point, we're still using HP for both PoE plus and PoE plus plus. You may also see some EP switches. So those are PoE switches, generally PoE plus. However, the power budget is usually less on those switches than on the standard HP switches. And then if the switch ends in the letter F, it's telling you all of the ports on that switch are fiber ports. So if you need a switch where it's 8 ports or 24 ports of fiber, you're looking for a switch that ends in F. So when you look at the model numbers here, this is an area where we get some confusion from people. So I do want to talk about it briefly. Right here in the center, these are your primary ports. So this is an 1920-8 HP, excuse me, a GS 1920-8 HP. So the GS is telling us all of the ports here are gigabit. The HP is telling us that this is PoE plus or possibly PoE plus plus. And the 8 before the HP is telling us it's 8 ports. So here's your 8 ports here. These are your primary 8 port, 1 gig ports, but you will also see there are 4 additional ports over here on the end, 2 copper ports and 2 SFP ports. So the area which causes confusion for people here is that these are not independent ports of each other. So what you've actually got is you've got 4 physical ports, but actually only 2 ports. So you've got the flexibility for each port to either use copper or fiber for that port. So you can have 1 with copper, 1 with fiber, 2 copper, 2 fiber, but you can't have 4. So that causes some confusion for people when they're looking at the switch. So I just wanted to bring that up. And then just when it comes to the SFP ports, SFP is 1 gig fiber ports. SFP plus are generally multi-gig SFP ports. And for the most part, you can use SFP SFP modules in an SFP plus port, but you cannot use SFP plus modules in an SFP port. Most of our switches do what's called virtual stacking, but we do have a couple switches that do true actual direct connect physical stacking. And so for those, they will have a dedicated DAC port on them for doing that uplink. And we do sell a special direct attached cable to link those switches together for actual hardcore virtual stacking, or for stacking, not virtual stacking. And then when it comes to PoE, most of our switches offer an intelligent PoE. So the way PoE is supposed to work is it's supposed to work on classes. There's a handful of classes which determine how much power draw a device will have. When you plug in one of those devices, it's supposed to tell the switch how much power to reserve for it. The problem is those classes are nowhere near granular enough. You can see here from class 3 to class 4, it basically doubles the power budget that would be assigned to that device. And going from 4 to 6 doubles it again. So with our intelligence, we're able to actually monitor the device that's plugged in, see how much power it really needs to use, and then we can free up the rest of your PoE budget to use it for other devices. Now, similar to the security products, we've got a lot of different series of switches here. We've got like 15 different series of switches here. We've tried to group them together into 4 sort of broad categories. So this is the other area where I was talking about before. We've got so many different, say 24 port PoE switches or 8 port switches. So by looking at the model numbers, it sort of gives you an idea of the type of functionality the switches are going to have. So if a switch here starts with 100, 1000, 1100, 1300, those are going to be your non-managed switches. The plug and play switch where you simply plug it in and it works. No VLAN functionality, no configuration. A step above those is our 1200 and 1900 series switches. So these have a web interface and provide some basic switching functionality such as VLAN tagging that can be configured through a web interface. Jumping up from there, we have our 1350 series switches, our 1920 series switches, and our 1930 series switches. So these are going to be your more sort of like a full function layer 2 switch that are entirely web and or cloud managed. They do not have a command line. And then jumping up to the ultimate series here, that's going to be our 2210, 2220, 3700, 3800, 4600 series switches. The 2200 series are true full layer 2 featured switches, and those do have command line interfaces. The 37 and 3800 are going to be sort of like your layer 3 light switches, etc. So we'll sort of go through this here. If you are looking to use Nebula, then you do have to stick with these models here. So the 1350, 1920, 1930 series, and the 2220, 3800 series. Those all support Nebula management if you want to use Nebula for cloud management. And we'll sort of briefly talk about some of these here, just to sort of, this is just showing you here. Here is our 1200 series. So again, let's look at some of these model numbers here. So we'll look here at GS 1200-5 or 5 HP. So the 1200 series tells us that it's a step above an unmanaged switch, but it's at that very bottom end as far as functionality goes. The GS is telling us it's all gigabit ports. The 5 is telling us that there's 5 ports on it. And then if you get the HP model, it's telling you that it supports PoE plus. If we jump up here to say the XGS 1210-12, the XGS is telling us that most of the ports are 1 gigabit, but there are some multi-gig uplink ports on here. And again, the 12 is telling us it's part of that 1200 series. So it is not unmanaged. There is a web GUI that you can access. And it does have some of the basic web managed features on it. 1900 series, similar to the 1200 series, a little bit more functionality in the GUI. And the 1900 series offers primarily rack mountable switches. So if you're looking for something to be rack mounted, you don't want the 1200 series, you want the 1900 series. The 1920 series is basically our what you're looking for if you're looking for a full layer 2 switch, but you do not need a command line interface. That's these guys here. Again, mostly rack mountable. And then the 1930 series, very similar to the 1920 series. Primary difference is the 1930 series is entirely, I believe, XGS, so has 10 gig uplink. So if you need 10 gig uplinks, you'll go with the 1930 versus the 1920 series. The XS 1930 series, these ones are going to be all multi-gig ports on those. And then we jump up here to the 2200 series. So these are going to be your true layer 2 switches. Nebula Cloud Management, they also have a command line interface for those of you that are old school and like to handle things that way. We'll just sort of skip through the rest here. So I guess I got ahead of myself. This is just talking about here again. Most of our switches here, basically, I think anything 1900 series and higher is going to support our intelligent PoE management. We've got the ability to control PoE power on a per port basis and the ability to schedule when PoE is active there. So if you've got a situation where you want to be rebooting your, certain devices at certain times of the day or night, that's one way that which you can do it. Errol is asking which switches are used for AV over IP. And that would be our 1350 series switches. And I'm trying to remember on this presentation, give me just a second if we've got a slide coming up on that. Yeah, we've got a slide coming up on those. So we'll talk a little bit more on those in just a few slides through here. So first, we've got a couple examples here of just how that intelligent PoE management works. So in this case here, we've got a nice higher end IP phone. It is a class 3 device. So by default, it's going to require 15.4 watts assigned to it from your PoE switch. However, in reality, it only needs 9 watts of power to be able to work. So by using this here, you can see if we tried to plug in 24 phones using the industry standard way of doing it, you would require a switch with a PoE budget of 370 watts. Whereas using our consumption mode, you only need a switch that has 216 watts of PoE power in it to be able to power those 24 phones. So a pretty significant difference as far as what sort of PoE budget you need your switch to have. And then a similar example here, this is using a pan tilt zoom IP camera. So in this case here, it's a class 4 device, so it'll be requesting 30 watts of power be reserved for it by the switch. But in reality, it only requires 16 watts of power. So if you're trying to power up 20 of these, you're looking at 320 watts of power using our intelligent PoE versus the 600 watts PoE budget that would be required using the industry standard spec. So we do have here our 1350 series of switches. I'm not entirely sure, Errol, if this is what you were looking for, but these are our switches that were designed for providing IP for surveillance functionality. Now, if you're just talking about doing like IPTV, we don't have any sort of dedicated switches for IPTV. Basically, I think anything 1920 series and higher is going to have IGMP snooping and the sort of features you would want for doing IPTV. But if you're looking to do IP video surveillance, these were the switches that were designed specifically for that, our 1350 series. So we'll talk a little bit about what those extra features are that we've added in these that aren't available in our normal switches. So to begin with, we have the ability to provide data and PoE power for up to 250 meters instead of the standard 100 meters that's part of the standard Ethernet spec. It doesn't require anything special on the connected client device. Anything that's PoE should work with this. The trade-off, though, is we are going to lower the data rate. So the data speed of that connection is only going to be 10 megabits per second. So if you're doing higher resolution cameras, it may not be fast enough, but for most IP cameras, 10 megs per cable should be enough to handle most streams that are out there. So again, it's only if you want to use it and need it to go more than the 100 meters, we've got this extended range mode you can put it into. These switches also provide continuous PoE power. So even if the switch needs to reboot, needs a firmware update, you're changing the configuration, and the switch reboots, it will continue providing PoE power to the connected devices so that those connected devices don't need to reboot. Because oftentimes some of those IP cameras take a real long time to boot back up should they lose power. We've also added in the web GUI and through the Nebula interface a camera status page, and it doesn't necessarily need to be for cameras, but it will show you what the connected device's name is, what the PoE power draw is for it, the IP address of the device, and then we give you a really easy way to go in there and power cycle the device should you need to. We also have an auto camera recovery mode. So if you're using these for IP cameras, you would use LLDP. If you're using this for non-cameras, you can use ping. So you set this up with a rule. How often do you want your switch to to check if that device is still online, and how many failures do you want before you power cycle the device. So you can configure all that here. So if a connected device stops responding to pings or LLDP, you can automatically reboot the device and get it back on. And you can see here we've got settings, so you can go in and define not only how often do you pull it, but how long after you power cycle it do you need to wait before you resume again, right? Because again, some of those products can take a long time, and if you start checking too soon, it'll never be able to fully boot back up and start responding to checks. And they've also boosted the surge protection on those models. So that's what makes those 1350 series different. In the case of Nebula, if you're using Nebula to manage the 1350s, you do need Nebula Pro, the Nebula Pro license, to get access to some of those extra features. If you're just managing these the traditional way, you don't need anything special to be able to use those features. And then on the accessory side of things, we do offer SFP modules. Unlike some other vendors, we don't force you to only use our modules. But if you buy a third-party module and it doesn't work, we can't help you. So we do provide our own modules if you do want those, but you can supply your own. So both SFP and SFP Plus modules, and then again, those direct attach cables for doing stacking. So that's it for switches. We're going to go ahead and move on here to wireless, something Errol, I actually know at least some of the answers to. So we do have a sort of SOHO class of access point. I'm not really going to be talking about those today. Today, I'm just focusing on the true sort of SMB focused access points that we have. And so we've got really like four series, and we've broken them up and grouped them together into two. So we have the 1 and 2 series. So those are models that start with the number 1 or the number 2, like an NWA 1123 or an NWA 210. Those would be part of that. And then on the higher end of things, we have that Ultimate series. So those are those models that start with 5 or 6. Something like a WAC 6303D-S or WAX 640S-6E, something like that. So but that first number is a 5 or a 6, it's going to be Ultimate. If it's a 1 or a 2, it's part of our flexible series. And we'll talk a little bit more about the differences between those. But when it comes to hardware design, it's the same philosophy across all of our access points. That's part of the reason why we're able to offer lifetime warranty on even our cheap, $79 access points, where a lot of our competition in that space is only providing 1 year or 2 years of warranty. So what we do is we design for basically to make the products last as long as we can and to perform as best we can. If you ever used to attend pre-COVID, when you used to attend a trade show with us, we would have our APs out and our competition's APs out, the screws removed so we could open them up to show you the differences between, say, us and a Ubiquiti or us and a Ruckus or a Meraki. And if you did that, you would, one of the first things you would notice is ours weighs a lot more. So why does ours weigh a lot more? So one of the things we've got here is we've got a large piece of metal that's behind the PCBA. So when we're looking at a solid state piece of hardware like this, the number one cause of failure over time is heat fatigue. It can cause solders to go bad. It can cause the little junctions in the switches to go bad. So what we try to do is we try to pull as much heat as we can off that PCBA and off those components. And then you can't see it in this photo, but there's a ton of vent holes in the back here so the heat can escape. If you look at some of our competition, not only do they not have any sort of shield, a lot of them don't have any sort of venting for the hot air to be able to escape. So that's one of the reasons why their warranties are so much shorter than ours. So we've got that for you. If you look at the board here, one of the other things you will see is we don't have any electrolytic capacitors. Instead, we only use solid state capacitors. Why? Because electrolytic capacitors are much more prone to failure. They can dry out, they can leak, they can boil over, they can catch fire. So we do not use electrolytic capacitors in any of our access points, only solid state capacitors, again, to help us get that longevity of the product itself. And then lastly, when we're looking at the design here, now we're going to talk a little bit about the RF. What do we do to make the Wi-Fi performance that much better? So one of the things you will see if you look at ours on the PCBA versus our competition is we have a lot more shielding on the board than you will generally see in our competitors. So this is designed not only to prevent interference between wireless modules, general EMI, But the shielding is also there to prevent interference from 4G and 5G signals. Some of those 4G and 5G signals are, excuse me, next door neighbors to Wi-Fi signals. And especially like when you've got an indoor DAS system that's bringing and broadcasting cellular signals inside a building like a convention center or an office building, those signals can be really strong and can bleed over. So we're shielded to help protect against that. You will also find on most models will have another metal shield between the PCBA and the antennas to provide just that much more isolation between what the antennas are picking up and what may be leaking out from the board itself. And the other thing you will find is we don't mount our antennas directly to the PCBA. So we always will have that on a separate PCBA that's separate from the main one to create better isolation, or even some of our much more expensive competitors are mounting those antennas directly onto the PCBA, where they're more prone to run into interference and weird bounces and things like that of the signal itself. So again, you'll find this across our entire SMB lineup of access points, this sort of design philosophy. We've also got some antenna technologies that you may not be familiar with if you've been selling other vendors access points. One of them is what we call a dual optimized antenna. In general, when you buy an access point, it's got one set of antennas in there and they're optimized for the idea that you're going to be mounting this access point on the ceiling above the area to be covered. However, out in the real world, that's not always the case. You don't always get to mount stuff on the ceiling. Sometimes you have to mount it on the wall. So those of our access points that have dual optimized antennas have two sets of antennas built in on them. One that's optimized for the ceiling, one that's optimized for the wall. So that way, when you're installing the hardware, you can say, okay, these ones are on the ceiling, use the ceiling antennas. These ones are on the wall, use the wall antennas, and it will change that antenna pattern to be optimal for wall mounted access point. Another technology we have that's pretty much exclusive to just us and Ruckus is smart antenna. So we'll talk a little bit here about smart antenna. So just a quick thing here, smart antenna is not beamforming. That's some confusion people get. Most 11AC wave 2 and higher APs have something called beamforming. Different technology, sort of looks the same from a distance, so that's why it causes some confusion. So smart antenna is not beamforming. So the idea behind smart antenna is basically the quality of the Wi-Fi experience, trying to maximize performance and quality of a Wi-Fi connection. Now, one of the leading causes of issues with someone's Wi-Fi connection is something called co-channel interference. In general, basically when you're dealing with Wi-Fi, there's different radio channels that you can use. Now, only one device can broadcast on a channel at a time. So when you've got a bunch of different devices talking to an access point, they're all taking turns broadcasting. If you've got multiple APs in an area, you try to make it so they don't have the same channel, but there's only so many channels out there. And if you're in an office building where there's lots of neighbors upstairs, next door, downstairs, you don't have control over their equipment. So you get in these situations where multiple devices try to use the channel at the same time and you get interference. It's kind of like when you're out driving in your car in the country and you're trying to listen to AM or FM radio, and there's two different stations on maybe the same channel, or at least, one's maybe 1070, one's 1090, and they start interfering with each other. It's the same thing that happens with Wi-Fi, and it causes packets to get dropped, people to have really frustrating experiences. So that is something that smart antenna has been explicitly designed to be able to try to solve those issues, or at least our implementation has. So this is just showing you here, your traditional ceiling mount AP has this sort of umbrella shaped antenna coverage pattern because it's supposed to be mounted on a ceiling and just covers broad of areas possible underneath it. If you're doing outdoor point to point, you've got directional antennas. So this is just sort of showing here, here's your traditional AP, it's mounted on the ceiling. And now you've got a source of interference. In this example, it's using a microwave. So this is a 2.4 gigahertz radio. But it can be other APs, other wireless devices, other industrial equipment that may be producing noise on 2.4 or 5. So when you have that, you're going to have a degradation in the quality of your connection, and your users are going to start complaining. So here's the same situation, but this time we're using smart antenna in the access point. So now what smart antenna is doing here is instead of having that one fixed antenna pattern, or two in the case of the dual optimized antennas, we actually have hundreds and hundreds of different antenna patterns. So the access point has an algorithm that chooses the basically antenna pattern that's best for each client device that's connected. So it'll focus the signal to that client device. But one of the cool things it does in addition to that is our algorithm also looks at other sources of RF interference and chooses an antenna pattern that basically reduces or eliminates the ability of the access point to hear that interference. So you're going to have a better signal getting back to that access point. Now, smart antenna technology doesn't require anything special on the client device, doesn't require the client device to be stationary. It works with mobile users as they roam around. So this is just showing here a test we did. We compared us with a comparable Aruba access point. Aruba does not offer smart antenna technology. And you can see we are in green, they're in blue, much better performance in the same test scenario. For those of you that want something that's independent, not something necessarily that we did, a few years back, the University of Brescia in Italy, their networking team, part of the computer sciences division, got together and decided to test claims that vendors like us and Ruckus were making. So they bought some of our APs, they bought some Ruckus APs, which also have smart antenna. They bought some Aruba HPs, which don't have smart antenna, and they bought Cisco, which also doesn't offer smart antenna, and tested them. So that little link you see at the bottom there, that'll take you to their actual full white paper and the full details of all the tests they ran. You can check that out. You can also just Google Zyxel smart antenna white paper. And we've got a white paper where we summarize the sort of key things that this independent researcher group did. But basically the short version is smart antenna works a lot better than non-smart antenna in real world scenarios where you have other sources of interference. And ours did better than Ruckus's did in their testing. So that's it for smart antenna. Now we'll talk a little bit about Wi-Fi 6. So Wi-Fi 6 is a relatively new technology that's come along. You started seeing products claiming Wi-Fi 6 maybe 2.5 years ago. The standard itself, I think, has actually only been certified for around a year. But it's the first really major rewrite to Wi-Fi since Wi-Fi launched all the way back in 1999. We've been making it faster, but we've been basically doing things the same way. Wi-Fi 6 is the first time since then that we've really looked at some of these structural problems in Wi-Fi and made changes to address those structural issues. So short version is Wi-Fi 6 is theoretically faster. Wi-Fi 6 devices can get to speeds up to nearly 10 gigabits per second. But of course, just like with regular Wi-Fi, if you did a speed test, you're going to get somewhere around half that speed of actual usable bandwidth. But still, 5 gigs or 6 gigs of throughput, still nothing to to shake your head at. And if you haven't noticed, I am recovering here from a bad situation which put me in the hospital the other day. So I'm still suffering a little bit of brain fog. So I'm probably a little less coherent today than I normally am. Not that I'm all that coherent to begin with. So anyways, larger capacity. So what larger capacity means is more devices connected to the same AP and more APs in the same area. So there's technologies here which help with both. And these are technologies that are complementary to smart antenna. So you can use these technologies, pair them with smart antenna, and improve things even that much more. And something really cool here, Wi-Fi 6 works on both the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz radios. 11AC was only a technology for the 5 gigahertz radio. So if you have an 11AC product, you're still using 11N on that 2.4 radio. You're not actually using AC on that 2.4 radio. So here's some of the technologies that came along that make this possible. We've got the ability to now do multi-user MIMO, both upstream and downstream, where with 11AC Wave 2, it was downstream only. You can do more different streams than you could previously using OFDMA instead of OFDM for much more efficient utilization of the bandwidth that's available out there. BSS coloring, basically a way to identify where the packets, who they're intended for. to try to reduce interference and by allowing devices to go, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to listen to that. That's not for me. And the ability to do scheduling of when stuff is being broadcast so you don't have multiple devices trying to broadcast at the same time. Now, some things to keep an eye on out there. Not all Wi-Fi 6 products or that are being advertised as Wi-Fi 6 have all of the Wi-Fi 6 features. So some products are missing some of these features like the upstream MIMO, even though they're still calling themselves Wi-Fi 6. So that's something to keep an eye on. Another thing is certain vendors are only putting Wi-Fi 6 on one radio. So for instance, Ubiquiti, some of their Wi-Fi 6 models, it's only Wi-Fi 6 on the 5 gigahertz radio. And the 2.4 radio is still 11N technology. So that's something to keep an eye on. When it comes to Zyxel Wi-Fi 6 products, all of our SMB products, all of those APs that have at least 3 or 4 digits in the model number, full Wi-Fi 6 feature set, Wi-Fi 6 on both radios. So that's not something you have to worry about with us. And before I jump on here, I thought I had a slide queued up. I guess I don't. Just to let you know, Wi-Fi 6 is also there. 6E is now available. So 6E is the same thing as Wi-Fi 6. The benefit of Wi-Fi 6E is it can use a new chunk of spectrum in the 6 gigahertz space. So 6 gigahertz has a huge amount of spectrum available. So you can have a lot of APs operating at full speed without interfering with each other, because we'll be able to use spatially separate chunks of spectrum. So that's really cool. The downside of 6 gigahertz is at the moment, you cannot use it outdoors in the United States. The other problem is because it's a higher frequency, is the range is less. So that's an area where people run into some issues with 6 gigahertz with Wi-Fi 6E, is that 6 gigahertz signal isn't going to go as far as your 5 or 2.4 signal. So you are going to need more APs to cover the same area using 6 gigahertz. Okay, so on to the slides. So a little bit here, this is talking about on-premise controller. So basically, again, our security gateways, most of them offer the ability to act as a local wireless LAN controller. And for the most part, the feature set is very similar to what you get with Nebula. So if you or your customer just don't like the cloud, you don't want to, trust AWS to stay up, this would be the other way of doing management of your APs. And the functionality is largely the same between the two modes. The really only difference between them is if you have really large load balancing groups, those work a little bit better with a local controller than with the cloud. And the local controller allows you to do rogue AP detection, which at least at this point is still something we cannot do with Nebula. And this is just a breakdown here of the different VPN, USG Flex, ATP models, and how many APs can be managed out of the box versus, and then how many APs can be managed with an upgrade. So you can see here a little VPN 50 can manage 4 APs out of the box, and you can upgrade that to be able to manage up to 36 access points. The ATP series basically requires the gold pack to unlock all of the APs, but since we only sell those with a gold license, you can see here an ATP 100 will support 24 APs for management. An ATP 800 can support 520 APs for management. If you got a really lot of APs to manage, you want the VPN 1000, which can manage up to 1,000 access points. And that, guys, is today's presentation. I know I went through a lot. I know I went through it fast and I wasn't always as clear as I could be. So if you've got questions, go ahead and send them in now using that question and answer interface. In the meantime, while I'm waiting on that, just a couple of things here for you. We do have a YouTube channel, and that's where these webinars are archived. So if you've missed a webinar that we did and you want to see it, or you saw a webinar and you think it'd be good for some of your team to watch, you can find those on our YouTube page. There's a lot of different Zyxel channels. So the North American page where you'll find webinars from me, Tri, Marcus, that will be recorded at Zyxel America channel. And we're on LinkedIn as Zyxel US channel. We've also got a user forum, forum.zyxel.com, that you can go to. So it's a user forum for you to talk to other Zyxel users and installers. However, it's also a really good place to provide feedback to our corporate headquarters. Our product management team, our R&D team, they do monitor those forums. Occasionally, they will weigh in and answer questions that people have, but they use it primarily as a way to be able to get an idea of what features people are most focused on, what improvements people are most looking for. So the more you guys talk about it and get people to say, yeah, we really need that, the more likely the R&D and PM team will kick those off. It's also where we'll post release notes, security advisories, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's see. So far, only that one question coming in from Errol. Hope you're still there, Errol. Let me see if I can find the answer for that. Like I said, I'm not the security guy, so I'm not completely talking. So yes, that CVE you were asking for. So Errol had asked about CVE-2022-30525. Was it resolved? So yes, it was resolved back in May of this year. So it was resolved. As far as offering, guarantees, I don't know how to answer that. It's something that's happens to every vendor. Every vendor at some point out there has had, some sort of CVE come through or security flaw that's been discovered. And, that's generally the way the industry works is when these security flaws are discovered, they generally notify us first and give us, a little bit of a heads up so we can be working on patches. Generally, by the time something is announced as a security flaw, we generally either have a firmware patch to solve it, or we're in the process of working on one and we'll publish something on our user forums and on our website based on that CVE, which gives you best practices of how to handle it until the firmware solution comes out. That was the only other question I had, so I'm going to go ahead and end today's webinar. Thank you for joining us, guys. We've got more webinars coming this month. Be sure to check those out.